Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host Raghunath and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Tuesday, and we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, the essence of all the Vedic teachings. Good morning, Kaustubha. How are you?
I'm doing good, Raghunath. Good to be here with you this morning.
You know what? I've been up since early morning studying scientific literature. Scientific journals you might want to know. And I've been studying the Baader Meinhof phenomenon. Perhaps you've heard of it.
Yes. Of course.
Mara, have you ever heard of that? It's also called the frequency illusion.
No.
Mara.
Didn't learn it at private school.
Didn't learn about that at private school. Frequency illusion.
She figures you may as well just get it out there.
Yeah.
It's common.
It's a cognitive bias in which after noticing something for the first time, there's a tendency to notice it more often. Put plainly, the frequency illusion is when a concept or a thing you just found out about suddenly appears to crop up everywhere. You want to buy a red car? All of a sudden you start seeing red cars. You know, your friend introduces you to some, peculiar thing, and all of a sudden you see it everywhere. Now, the interesting thing about this is it happens in the material world with, a red car, but it also happens in the spiritual world. I think what we call them on Wisdom of the Sages is our goggles. We wear goggles of, it doesn't have to be just of spiritual things, but we start to see Krishna everywhere. Our buddy Steve, me and Bob Healy's buddy.
Steve, you said?
What's his name? Steve. He's got this. He just sent me this text that, he's an other, but he's a regular other, and he said, I went for a walk. I went late night, early morning stroll at the hospital, and I found a chapel in the hospital, and in that chapel was the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Boom. Really?
Boom. Right? Now, that Srimad Bhagavatam has been sitting there forever. And he's been probably right near that, near where he goes for a walk. But because he's attuned now to Krishna, now he's starting to see Krishna everywhere. He starts seeing spirit everywhere. Now, it's not just with, and this is where we're going with the show today, is God is everywhere, spirit is everywhere, but we just don't have the God goggles on. We've got other goggles. I was going to say, and sometimes you hear this word and I don't like it, are sinful activities. I don't like that word, sinful activity, because it makes it sound like,
2 words.
I don't like that phrase.
Okay.
Well, you know why? It's almost like sinful activity makes it sound like there's some judgment from out there. But I like to call what we, a Christian background, my Catholic background would call sinful activities. I would just like to call them crippling activities. It puts no judgment on what they are. It's just that they cripple you. So your crippling activities, say intoxication, or say drug addiction, or say addictive sexual activity, or something like that. Anything that sort of like possesses you and drags you down a dark rabbit hole. a dark rabbit hole. That is so we can also develop the goggles for that,
Okay.
right? You could start to see alcohol everywhere, or you could find heroin everywhere. I don't find heroin anywhere. I'm not looking for it. But when you're looking for it, you can find it anywhere. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think it goes beyond just those, like you're saying, like these really dark places. But what Bhagavatam's going to also do is say, even those things that seem wholesome, if God is removed from the picture, right? If you try to take that and experience it in isolation from that original source that we're all naturally connected to, then it also becomes, I don't know what phrase you're just saying, but it crippling. It also becomes crippling. Yeah.
What do you think of crippling behavior? Want to start using that word instead of like sinful activity?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we can give it a shot.
You know what I mean by that? Sinful activity?
Yeah.
It just sort of sounds like, oh, you're being sinful.
Well, you see, this is going to come up today because, you see, we read yesterday about how the devas, the gods, right? They're praying to Lord Vishnu, and they're speaking about all of the value that comes when one reconnects, and we can go down the list of things that they mentioned. But then they say, and what's going to come up today is that two categories of people are unable to reconnect. And one category,
Reconnect is such a good word, by the way.
Yeah.
Just want to interject that there. Reconnect.
Well, that's my point. I'm doing what you're doing there, right? I'm using the same kind of like language that doesn't trigger us.
Inserting new language.
Yeah, inserting. Okay, so
that's what it is. That's what we're doing. That's
you're
what we
you're
are.
a language man. You're a
wordsmiths.
You're a linguist, rather. So these two people are those that are too caught up in materialism, and then the other one are those that are offensive.
What's the Sanskrit for those two words? Do you know?
Well, let's see. Often, what's used for offenses, and this is key, actually. This is key. Well, Pashandi means atheist.
Okay.
For as far as I've seen it translated.
Oh.
But generally, when we're talking about offense, the word is, and this is really key because Prabhupada sometimes, he was raised in Christian schools, and I think sometimes when he's speaking about theology, he translates it into a Christian type of language.
Sure.
So the Sanskrit word that's often used for an offender, like an offender to God, is aparadhi, right?
An aparadhi.
So aradhanam is the word for worship. Aparad means that which is contrary to or crippling to one's worship. Or you could even say one's meditation, right? One's deep thought or one's reconnection.
You know what? Sometimes you could replace them, even your new word, with an original Sanskrit word, like bring it right back. Like,
bring
I don't
back
say
aparadhi, yeah.
Right? I'll say aparadhi. Like, that guy's an aparadhi. I don't want to hang out with him. He's a total aparadhi. It's like they use the word dharma. We take the word dharma, we translate it to religion, and then we realize it's sort of an untranslatable. Let's bring it back to dharma. Let's just say dharma. Aparadhi.
Aparadhi. So
crippler.
Yeah, so
he's a crippler.
Yeah. Okay. So well, anyway, why don't we get into these verses? Because this is all going to come up. It's all good stuff.
Okay. Hey, before we start, I just want to say tonight, Sweet Baby Krishna, if you're a Patreon member, I'm doing a Sweet Baby Krishna class on 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Eastern time.
I believe it would be p.m. tonight, not a.m.
p.m.
Thank you.
Yes. It is 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. tonight. And that is for Patreon members. If you want to become a Patreon member, this is a community-supported podcast. So you go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages, and you give some monthly contribution of your choice. And then you can join us on our little Patreon party we have. It's a whole secret chamber that once you get in that club, you don't want to get out. Matter of fact, we don't
Do
let
they
you
let
out.
you out?
We don't let you out.
Oh.
You can't get in. You can't get out.
All right.
All right. Let's dive in with this.
Let's do it.
Brother Kaustubha.
Thank you, Brother Raghu.
Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narotamam devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayam madiraye Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances to the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and to Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayeshva badreshu nityam bhagavat sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service to the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmidatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances to my spiritual masters who have opened my eyes, which were blinded by darkness of ignorance, with the ointment of knowledge. Just rub the ointment of knowledge on my eyes.
Okay.
What?
Yeah.
Seventh chapter, those who don't surrender to Krishna. We got the Maya Pratyagya. These are all great insults. You Maya Pratyagya. What is it? Oh no, there's the four that surrender. The Gyani is the ones that surrender. Who are the four that don't surrender? We got the
one whose knowledge has been stolen, right? Maya by illusion.
Yeah. The Mudha.
Mudha, fool.
What's the verse? Let's think. Chatur Vidha Bhajante Mam. Yeah. The Mudha, the Maya Pratyagya. Oh, Mara, you know this.
I'm gonna pull it up for you right now. If you want to go there.
Come on. First guys to get it on the chat board wins. Oh, Asuram.
Asuram Bhavam.
Asuram Bhavam Ashritaha. There's one more we're missing.
Here we go. Namam Duskrituno Mudha.
The Duskritas.
Naradhama. Maya Ya Parityagana. Asuram Bhavam Ashritaha.
Love that verse.
Because it's so insulting.
I need some new Vedic insults. Don't be an aparadhi. Don't be an asura. Don't be a naradama.
Why are you bringing up this verse?
Why? Well, we're talking because you were speaking about people who get no access. They don't have the VIP all access pass to get to God because they're doing some activity
that's crippling,
right? Which is sort of like they're doing it to themselves, but it's closing the door. But I was thinking also this is a little bit this what do I call it again? Frequency illusion. It's a little bit like the power of intention, the secret. You're getting what you look for in one sense. But the real question is, what are you looking for? You know what I mean? And so I think the Bhagavatam is just training ourselves. We're just going to train ourselves to see spirit everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's quite a romantic journey, isn't it? It's real romance.
I listened to a great talk last night by Raghunath Swami.
Yes.
It was one of the old ones. It was like 1991. And when
old ones are good.
Those old ones are really good, and he's kind of like graver in those ones, right? It's kind of like he's like he's just pumping it out, real. Anyways, it's great, really good class, and he was speaking about this, which is coming up today in the talk too, in these verses about perceiving God within the heart, and perceiving God everywhere, like within the heart of every living being, seeing God everywhere. And he said, this is what he said. He said the preliminary stage of Krishna consciousness, or you could say, the preliminary stage to deep spiritual insight. It means we should be looking for God everywhere and in everything. Okay. In other words, God is there, but we're not perceiving it. And why not? What's preventing us from picking up? You use this, what do you call the Dustin Hoffman frequency thing? What is it called?
Dustin? Oh, Baader Meinhof. Dustin Hoffman.
So there's another
Baader
thing.
Meinhof phenomenon. Come on.
Well, do you know what an autostereogram is?
That wasn't in the journal this morning.
Okay,
The journal I
that
was
wasn't in the
reading.
journal. An autostereogram. People sometimes call it optical art, but it's
Oh,
like
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
3D art, right?
Yeah, the things that like in the 90s, these were big. You stare at it and you're like, you
Yes.
don't see it. And you got to look at it and look at it and look at it. And all of a sudden, boom, it
Right.
pops. And all of a sudden, oh, it's a guy in a boat.
Right.
Something
Yeah,
like
and it's
that.
obvious, and you can't not see it now. It's just like it's standing out there. 3D is like as plain as day, right? But
Yeah.
but two people are looking at the same image, and one is seeing it. Don't you see it? Can't you see it? It's right there. And the other person's looking. I don't see it. I don't see it. Keep looking. Keep looking.
Yeah.
Keep looking, and you'll see it. But if the way those audio, they're called audio stereograms. The way that they work is they're playing with the way that the eye
The
the eye is trained to
focuses?
focus in a certain way. You got two eyes, so you get
Sure.
two different angles on something, so you can see it in 3D.
Sure.
And what they do is they embed in that image, which is usually made of like dots. They embed with that image the image twice in some way. It's somehow when you look at it with your natural focus, you don't see it. And let's put it this way: when you look at it with the conditioned focus, right, the way that
Right.
your eyes have been trained to see, you won't see it. But you have to look at it deeper and deeper. You have to adjust your focus, and then boom, it just pops out. And so, yeah, I think what we're playing with in some of these verses, and what Radha Swami was mentioning, there, we have to retrain our focus. We've been trained to see the world separate from that divine source from which it's all stemming. We have to keep looking at it and keep looking at it. And when I say look at it, it doesn't mean just with the eyes, right? It means you look at it through reflecting on the knowledge that we get from these yogic texts. Something happens in our life, good or bad, and our mind is conditioned to respond in a certain way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it in another way. With the goggles you're talking about, right? With in those goggles in the Bhagavad Gita, they're called Jnana Chakshusa, with the eyes of knowledge.
The goggles of knowledge.
You can call them goggles of knowledge if you prefer.
You know what you did earlier? You took the word Krishna consciousness out of the sentence and put in deep spiritual insight. I like that. I noticed that.
Well, it's just it's only because we're triggered by these things. We're triggered by, let's go deeper. There's a whole bunch of triggers that we can translate. Let's read these verses.
Yeah.
And get into the whole conversation, because I think it's all really interesting.
All right, sir.
You ready? So we're on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5. It's still Maitreya responded to Vidur's initial questions. And we read yesterday how the Devas were speaking to Lord Vishnu, and they were saying that one who takes shelter of your feet, right, your lotus feet, and we described that that's a poetic device. But it's saying those who reconnect with you, that this is what they get. Text 39 said that connection is an umbrella from all miseries. Text 40 said it provides one full knowledge. Text 41 said it vanquishes our bad karma. Text 42 said it reveals knowledge and detachment.
You are like the Cliff Notes, man.
That's what I'm doing.
And just going through this like a Cliff Note, just boom, the essence. You're the essence. Right, that's your new nickname.
Oh, whoa, okay.
You're the essence.
And text 43 said that reconnection, it awards remembrance and courage.
Remembrance and courage. Yeah.
So now the next two verses, 44 and 45, are going to describe those that have problems reconnecting, right? And two conditions are going to be mentioned. One is that one's just too materialistic, and that'll be defined in a particular way, which is something that we need to discuss. And then the second one is those that are offensive, or we could say aparadhis, those who cripple their worship, or I would call them people with issues. Okay?
Yeah.
You got issues. All right? It's like the truth is there, but you're not seeing why? Because you got issues that you got to deal with. Okay. So let's dive into text 44. You want to read text 44?
44. Oh Lord, persons who are entangled by undesirable eagerness. for the temporary body and kinsmen,
Mm-hmm.
and who are bound by thoughts of mine and I, are unable to see your lotus feet, although your lotus feet are situated within their own bodies. I mean, God's within them.
Yeah.
But let us take shelter of your lotus feet. That's a
Okay.
great one. Persons who are entangled by undesirable eagerness for the temporary body. So you're identifying the body like, this is me.
Yeah.
And kinsmen. So
They are mine.
right. They think, hey, these are my people. These are my. And can you explain why it's bad? Why is it bad to identify with your body and your kinsmen? Kinsmen mean they're of my same kin. They're like my brothers. They're my posse, my team. Why is that so bad, man?
You know,
You want me to sit in isolation?
So text 44 is describing those that are too materialistic, based on they have the mine and I mentality. Aham mimeti. Prahlad Maharaj is going to speak about that later. And then the next verse is going to describe those with the issues, defensive, the aparadhis.
By the way, George Harrison wrote a song about this,
I'm
right?
mine.
I, me, and
day,
mine.
all through the night.
He got it from this.
He did. And so this is, again, some of them, it's interesting. I was given a talk recently, and someone asked, we're talking about life, death, reincarnation, cycle of birth and death, and then liberation from that, where one steps out of the virtual reality and enters into the spiritual realm. And it's a common question that comes up. Maybe people ask you this sometimes, like, what about my family? Will I know them and will I be with them?
Right.
Right.
And then you come in with some harsh statement like, they're not your family. You're in Maya.
Oh, by the way, I saw episode 2 last night of Surviving Death.
I don't think episode 2 was that good. That was the one about
It's about the mediums.
the mediums.
I was thinking
It's real, man. Did you
3
ever go to a medium?
No, and I have no interest, really.
Man, I went.
I know
once. It
you
was
probably
freaking scary. These mediums. Well, you know what? Because that's the thing about
I got him.
mediums.
I
and
should
we're
have
not
never
going to go
brought this
there.
up. Here we go. Yeah,
We're not going to go there because we
Okay.
don't want. We're in a good place in the Bhagavatam. But I
That's
just want
right.
to say that these mediums,
Yeah.
they're just cued in. They have ghost goggles on.
Okay.
I'm serious. They got ghost goggles. So they're dealing with higher beings, and the higher beings are even giving them some insight or revealing some truth. But you got to be careful in that realm because you could meet some malefic being who's giving you info, and then you're in debt to the malefic being. That's the problem with
That's
mediums.
one of the many problems.
One of the many problems with mediums. No, I mean, they're not all problematic. They could give you some help. There's famous mediums who've like channeled some benevolent angel type of being.
Maybe.
We're not going to talk about this, Kaustubha, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. No,
Be
we're not going to talk
careful
about it. I'm
for
just
the-
going to say more about it.
Just be careful for the malefic
Okay.
beings, because then you're a debtor
Okay.
to the dark angel.
So, getting back to the question that was posed to me about, like, will we be with our loved ones after this? And I thought about that question, and I thought of it in 2 ways. Like, we get in, for instance, Bhagavatam gives us one example of Dhruva, right? This young boy yogi who his initial intention in practicing yoga was to, like, for material opulence. He wanted a kingdom greater than his father's. He had been offended. He was hurt. And he was determined with an extreme level of intensity to perform yoga to get material benefit out of it. And but he was so fortunate that Narada, this great Bhakti-yogi sage, just kind of was like, who is this little kid? And look at the intensity with this yoga. This guy is like so serious. Let me see if I can help him, right? And so he gives him some good instruction that this boy Dhruva says, your instruction may be good, but it just doesn't, more or less Narada said, let it go, right? Let it go.
Let it go.
But he said, I just can't let it go. And he said, okay, well then do your yoga like this. And he gives him instructions. So even though his intention is materialistic, he's receiving these bhakti yoga instructions from a pure sage like Narada, and he tells him, meditate on the mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Krishna related mantra, and make yourself out of mud. Go to Vrindavan, go to the holy forest of Vrindavan, chant this mantra, regulate your breath, and then make this deity of Krishna, out of the mud, out of Lord Vishnu. He gave him this whole practice, and he did it with such a level of intensity, and he achieved the goal of it. But beyond his materialistic goal, his goal changed. Right? He became purified from that. He became, rather than wanting the kingdom that he was after earlier, he begins to recognize that that's not important at all. And how, as a matter of fact, he was even embarrassed that he had wanted that. When one can have God, one has everything. And why would I want this paltry kingdom? So he has this whole shift, and eventually he lives his whole life. He achieved that state as a boy, and then he lives his whole life as a ruler, as a king. And then at the end, he's going back to the spiritual world. He's exiting the virtual reality. He's doing so on some kind of spiritual space kind of ship, right? On some kind of flowery airplane of some sort. And
it's a great concept, isn't it? Flower airplane. What the heck does that mean? It's like a giant rose.
He's lifting off.
What does that mean?
You will know.
Or does it it's just like a spaceship with lots of flowers on it? Like ever go to one of those high school float parades, like the Rose Bowl? Is that a flower airplane? But if it flies,
I think it's a warped reflection of one.
Or is it? It's a warped reflection. Everything in the material world is a perverse reflection of the spiritual world.
Yeah.
Those float parades are like the flower airplanes. So if you're unfamiliar with this, the Bhagavatam describes. It does flying ships of flowers. Is that unbelievable?
Okay, so he's leaving. Dhruva's rising on his flower airplane. Can you imagine how blissful that moment must be?
Oh my God.
But as he's lifting off, what does he think about? Quiz, Raghu.
He thinks about God.
No.
He thinks about his friends, his
Close.
family.
There you
friends
go.
and family.
Right.
His younger brother, his mother.
His mother. He thinks about his mother. It was his mother that originally told him to go out to the forest and do yoga, right? She was like his original guru. She loved him, even when his own father had kind of dissed him. What to speak of his is it called a stepmother, or what do you call if your father has two wives? What do you call the other one?
Well, in my case, I called her. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, in any case,
call it a stepmother.
Let's say stepmother. The stepmother completely dissed him. His father bowed to that pressure and dissed him. His mother was always there for him. So he's being lifted off. And what does he think? What about my mother? How can I leave without my mother? And we see that he's kind of like told, hey, look right behind you, and she's coming on a plane like right behind him, just following along. So that's an indication. There's an indication in Bhagavatam that if that is our desire to be with a loved one beyond this realm, that is accessible just as every desire is, right? It's like said in the spiritual realm, like even the ground is made of wish-fulfilling gem, right, of Chintamani.
Right.
So certainly that's possible. But this is what I want. This is what I also tried to share. It wasn't just some cold, harsh, Gyanik answer, Raghunath, okay? But you see, here it's being described that we just read that a materialistic mentality was being described, and it said that they're too attached to their own temporary body and too attached to their kinsmen. Yeah. And so what is wrong with that? In one sense, there's nothing wrong with that when it's limited to that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if it's not limited to that. But that limitation that these people are special, I have a deep attachment for this, but other people are not so special. That's ignorance, right? And that ignorance has to be countered. And if we're not consciously countering that ignorance, then we're going to remain in this very limited. Then basically we're building ourselves a sandcastle. These people are special to me. These people are my source of happiness in life.
You're creating others.
You're creating others, but even beyond that, it's like as a strategy, as a long-term strategy for happiness, it's doomed to fail. Because if your happiness is tied to this small group of people, and your identity is tied to this small group of people, it's simply a short matter of time before that sandcastle that you've built crumbles. And so it's not like it's evil, but it's just not fully informed. That
Okay,
the
I like
same,
that. I like that.
yeah,
It's not evil. It's just not fully informed.
yeah,
And there's every chance you could take birth again with those people in different positions.
or the fact is we've taken birth so many times and had so many families, and each time we felt that this family is special and this family is the source of my happiness, and every time it comes to an end, and every time it fails. So the wise person is kind of trying to see that there's a level of consciousness where the kind of connection that I feel with these people, the security that I feel, the happiness that I feel, I can feel with every living being. And why not open yourself up to that? So I was thinking it's kind of like this. Imagine if you had like $5,000, Rogan, and that was like your treasure, right? Like that's, and from that $5,000, you felt a sense of security, and it's something that you didn't want to part with. And say you were traveling, like moving, let's say like permanently from like the United States to Europe. And when you had to pass into the next country, you had to exchange that money, right?
Yeah.
And someone was there helping you through it. And he said, okay, now you give them your $5,000. And you're like, but I can't. You know, this is my $5,000. It's so important to me. You know, to enter in there, I have to give that up. And it's like, no, you don't understand. When you give them the $5,000, they're going to give you these euros. But I don't even know euros. This is my $5,000. It's dollars that I know. And this
You
is
lose
my
on the
$5,000.
exchange a little bit.
Don't try to screw up the analogy. So it's like, no, you're going to get that back just in another form. And as a matter of fact, we're going to give you like tons more money just for entering the country. Okay. So, but it's like, no, I can't, you know? So it's like, we're thinking my family, they're so important to me. No, but what you don't realize is that you might not see them in that same form. You know, we don't want these forms. These forms are very limiting, but you can have a connection with anyone in the spiritual, but you can feel the same connection in a much deeper and realistic way with every living being once we get past this lack of this crippling vision that we have.
Sure.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So why is
the
it?
analogy is not perfect.
Why not?
Not to criticize your analogy, but
Because?
to criticize your analogy.
Yeah.
Because
what is
you're
wrong with
saying
my
is
analogy?
you'll
How
actually get
dare
something-
you? How dare you criticize my analogy?
Your point is you'll actually get a better exchange rate. You'll get much more than what you actually have. You're gonna go in exchange.
right.
You're gonna get so much more.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
So it was a good analogy.
no, but you usually get dollar for dollar. You know,
Right.
usually
So
lose
well,
on
let's say
the
that part of the reason why you're moving into that other place is they're going to give you tons. You get a better job. You're going to get much more money.
Okay.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay. But the fact is, when the Bhagavatam speaks about materialism, it's less often than picturing like we'll get, what is it, Moneygreve and what's his name, the two brothers,
Nalakuvara.
Yeah, like they're kind of like, that's what, when we think of like materialism, that's what they're naked, they're in the water, they got lots of girls, they're getting drunk. Like that's what we think of when we think of materialism.
Spring break for the demigods.
Yeah, like spring break, exactly. But more commonly, when the Bhagavatam is talking about materialism, it's talking about this idea that my home, my wealth, my possessions, my family is where my Atma Supersidity, where the satisfaction of my soul comes from. And it's saying, no, that's not where Atma Supersidity comes from. Recognize it, right? There's a temporary type of happiness that crumbles from that. Don't allow that lack of vision to cripple your spiritual vision. Recognizing God within your own heart, recognizing God within the heart of every living entity, and feeling a sense of love, and bliss through that. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's go ahead.
It's a tough concept. But I get it. You got to start to distinguish that all these people that I love, I don't possess them. I can still love them. I just don't possess them. And I think you sort of nature sort of does that anyway to you, because as I get older, your kids grow up, they move away. You don't see them every day. So you realize I got to love them, but they're not in my life so much anymore. And it happens sometimes we lose a spouse as we get older,
Yeah.
or sometimes we lose a child as we get older. So nature is naturally just sort of hacking away at the things we thought we possessed. And if I don't get what you said, that I'm not a possessor, there is no I, me, and mine. If I'm not a possessor of even my own body, sometimes you look back at a picture of yourself when you're younger, and you're like, what the hell happened to me? How did I get this old? And so it's shocking that nature is just stripping away everything. So I'm either going to get enlightened or I'm going to get bitter at this world. And so you're recommending the path of enlightenment, which is, this is truth. Hear that truth from the get-go, from the very beginning, because Kaustubha's giving us this valuable information.
I'm not
Learn it
giving.
now.
I'm just reading from Bhagavatam.
I know. You're just passing it on. And that's that's why I love that the example of the first class intelligent, second class intelligent, third class intelligent. Kaustubha's reading the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam's saying, hear it. Hear this truth and apply it to your life. That's first class intelligence. An example would be, the stove is hot. Don't touch the stove. And I hear Kaustubha's words. I'm not going to touch the stove. That's first class intelligence. Now in America, we like to look at ourselves as, I don't have to hear from anybody. I just sort of renegade and cavalier. I'm a cowboy.
Don't worry about, or how about this, Eric? Don't worry about what I'm doing. Worry about what you're worried about what I'm doing.
What? You read my Instagram post.
I did.
So yeah, I said, Kaustubha says, don't touch the stove. And I said, what do you care about what I'm doing? I'm going to touch the stove. Then I touch the stove and it burns my hand. I was like, man, he was right. I shouldn't have touched the stove.
I'm not
That's
going to do it again.
called second class intelligence.
Right.
Now, third class intelligence is what I'm filled with. That's Kaustubha says, don't touch the stove. It's hot. And I said, well, I'm going to try it. It might not be hot. I touch it. I burn my hand. And then I start thinking, well, maybe this time it won't be hot. I touch it again. I burn my hand. I repeatedly touch the stove. It's called running east looking for sunsets. It's not going to happen. And that type of insanity of doing the same thing again and again. So the Bhagavatam has given us truth. And truth is for all people, of all cultures, of all religion. No one owns it. Hear it and apply it. Don't have third class intelligence like I do. Don't have second class intelligence. Hear it and apply. Whatever our past is, that's over. Now let's see if we can just apply it now.
That what you're describing as third class intelligence, that's repeating something that's bringing bad results, even though we've been told, right? It was interesting in that same talk that I mentioned that Raghunath Swami was giving about the Paramatma, about seeing God in one's own heart and in the heart of every living being. And so he said, that's the beginning of spiritual light or deep spiritual insight or Krishna consciousness, is that we're searching for that. We're trying to see that everywhere, just like it's one of those optical art things where you just have to keep looking at it to see it, keep trying to see it.
Pop.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone just told me that it's there. Right. Yeah, it's someone that I trust just told me that it's there. Right. So keep looking. And he said, he gave this. He said, what is the first thing that when we hear the voice of God in the heart, like if someone's deeply spiritual advanced, they could be hearing that voice all the time, right? Feeling that input all the time. But he says for most of us that are so covered, it appears in one way. When we're really, when we become so callous to that voice, when we become so deaf to that voice, the initial way that we begin to hear that voice, you know what he said?
What?
He said it's that feeling of discomfort that we have when we do something that we know is wrong. Right. That feeling of discomfort, like something's not, I know this isn't right. I'm doing it anyway. And I feel that feeling, You could call it guilt, but that's another triggering word, right?
Yeah.
But that feeling, he said this, and this is what really reminded me of what you just said, just reminded me of what he said about the third class intelligence and doing something over and over again. He said that we've made the heart hard by time and time again betraying God within the heart.
Ooh, I
Right.
likey.
Right?
I like
Time and
that.
time again, and whatever it may be, in so many ways, right? And time again, we respond with arrogance, right?
With arrogance. This is Tom from Cleveland wrote on the chat board, which I haven't been reading this entire time, but I just glanced down and I read this and I thought it was good. Fourth class intelligence is keep touching the stove, even though it's burning your hand, but pretend it's fine because you didn't want the other person to be right. So yeah.
Sure.
That's true. Yeah, you're just like, it's killing you, but you're doing it anyway, and you're smiling, and you're trying to like squeeze any like type of bit of happiness from it.
Yeah. And you tell other people that this is happiness, right?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, I mean,
happy.
people are sitting bars all over, all over the place, doing exactly that, right?
And romanticizing it.
Romanticizing it, writing songs about how it's cool, whatever it is. Yeah.
Or what do they call it? My wife's Irish, so we get into this. My wife's very festive when it comes to holidays. So it's just all the kids getting dressed up. My child was dressed up as a leprechaun yesterday, getting ready for St. Patrick's Day. And so
Getting ready for it.
Right. We're playing all these Irish songs. And all the Irish songs are all like just romanticizing, just like drinking and pubs and stuff like that.
Right.
And if you really shine light on what you're doing is you're just like taking this gift, this computer, this incredible computer, and just pouring fermented liquid in until the computer is just broken and everything becomes fuzzy and static, and you start hugging people you don't know, and you could call that like a spiritual revelation or something, but you've lost your senses of now weaker. It's just like ruining the gift you've been given. And of course, it doesn't always end up in hugging somebody. Sometimes it ends up in you driving over somebody, or sometimes it ends up in a bar fight, or, God knows what other criminal activities could happen in such a state.
Yeah, that's saying, not only have I, through my decisions, made my hearing of that voice in the heart, I've deafened it through that activity, but I'm going to intentionally deafen it intensely right now by pouring this fermented liquid into my system. Right. I'm going to intentionally make myself still more callous to it.
Kaustubha, we are just one tiny step from becoming our own worst enemy. Just one foolish choice.
Or we may be many steps into it. Yeah, it's true.
Every miserable habit begins with a first time.
Yeah, he said, it made me think, in other words, if you think about that when I hear the voice and I choose to ignore it, then I become a little bit more deaf, right? I become a little bit more callous, a little bit more thick-skinned, a little bit less sensitive to that voice. And then he said, when you think about that, it has so much to do with the internal life of the spiritual person, right? In other words, with every choice I make, God's sitting there right next to me, and I'm aware of that. Let me become very aware of like every step that I consciously take away. And the understanding of the Paramatma is that, and this is why, this gets back to what we were talking about before, when we use a term like offensive, right? Like there are those that are offensive to God. To me, that term,
Repurpose it.
It can be misleading because it's not like God is sitting there all pissed off about it, like offended. God, from what we hear about Paramatma, what we hear about Krishna, is just like, if that's what you want, you can have it.
Yeah, it's not this.
I'm waiting for you to come back.
It's giving you what you want. So it's our behavior.
Yeah.
Let's repurpose that word.
Offensive should go.
Aparadhi.
Should be turned into aparadhi, or
Well, generally
to the cripplers.
Generally, people who are offensive, they've got issues. It's their problem. It's not like they're. Right. It's not like like you said, God's sitting there offended by your behavior. God loves. God is love. It's that you meet these people too. You could do nothing to them bad, but for some reason they're crooked inside. They're bent. They're dented. Right. And they just see something or hear something, take something out of context. What are you looking at me? There's a classic thing in New York growing up. You can't look at anybody because people get offended if you look at them. I was just looking. You looking at me?
You know, what was I just gonna say? It just slipped my mind. Keep
The
going,
point
Robert.
is, the point is when you look for trouble, you find trouble. When you look to be offended, you look to be hurt. It's our only problem. When you see other people's faults, it says something more about you,
Yeah. What I
right?
was thinking of this, you take like a rich kid, right?
Yeah.
That everything's supplied for them by their parents. And still, let's say they've moved out of the home and everything, but even their apartment and everything that, that they have is being provided for them. But
Rich
they
kids.
have this animosity towards their parents, right?
Yeah.
And someone's going off on them, like the person's criticizing the parents. I don't need them. Who? Apparently you do need them, because like everything you got is provided by them. And actually, they just love you, but you've got issues. You've got issues. So that's the second verse that we're going to read today. It's like it describes that that person with issues, and that is this. You see, this is the thing. There's the materialist, and the materialist is the person that's got caught up in the illusion, right? And here it's being described, my kinsman, my family is the best, and this is the source of my happiness, and let me build a home, and let me get a car, and let me provide all the needs, and let me enjoy the physical intimacy, and let me enjoy, like this is where my happiness is going to be. Okay, that's a person that got lost.
Mhm.
Now, someone may see through that, right? Someone may see that materialism just leads to suffering. I want to break free from this. Now we're talking about a spiritualist. But this spiritualist says, but I am God. Now that's a person with issues.
Mm.
You see, there's an interesting commentary, and maybe we'll get to today, or we could just hold on to it for tomorrow. But back to what Raghunath was saying about this, that when we consciously choose not to hear that voice, or when, it's just like you tell someone something over and over again, at a certain point you just stop telling them because they're not listening. Obviously you don't want to hear this, then go ahead and do what you want to do, and I'm waiting for you to come back. So the way that we lose the vision is through consciously here he says, like, betraying, right? Constantly betraying that voice in the heart. And the way that you open yourself back up to that vision is by responding positively to those signals that we get, right?
Nice.
Yeah, when you consistently respond positively to those signals, and then he makes the point that, of course, we're careful, because whatever we call the voice in the heart, it could, we can call any voice the voice in the heart, right? That this is God speaking to me. This is, we can justify, rationalize all kinds of things that are just voices in our mind. But he says that the God in the heart, and this is what we're taught through the yogic texts, is confirmed by the yogic text and confirmed by the great souls, right? By the sadhus. So when I hear some voice telling me this is the way you should respond, is that response in harmony with what the yogic texts teach, right? Is it in harmony with what guru and sadhu teach, what the great souls teach? And then when you respond positively to that message, then you're opening yourself up to that vision. It's like you're staring at, if that ability to stare at that optical art, and at a certain point for the image to arise and become clear.
It pops.
It's that vision is going to be facilitated by our genuinely trying to see it, and by accompanying that with a lifestyle where we respond favorably to that voice, because that's just an indication, like, I don't want the illusion anymore. I want the reality. I want to see it. I want to see that consciousness, right? That's why some of these that, again, going back to that what's it called again, surviving death. Like I preferred the first episode to the second one, and I'm looking
You
forward
saw
to
episode
6.
6 yet?
No, I'm thinking of jumping ahead now. Like, I don't
Jump
want to
ahead.
sit through the second one. Is like another medium one.
Yeah, I know. Why put 2 medium ones?
Because people watch it.
People are playing around with the devil. That's what's going on.
They're playing with the devil, and so. But in any case, when some of those stories that those people told, right? Like, I was trapped under the water for half an hour. My
That's unbelievable.
ribs were being crushed, and she came out, or they dragged her body out of there, and her ribs were crushed, and they saw
Yeah.
she was underwater for half an hour. But then when she describes what she saw and how she felt, I didn't feel any fear. I didn't
Yeah.
feel any pain,
Yeah.
And she's describing these kind of the beautiful scenes that she saw. It's just indicating that there's a consciousness beyond the consciousness that we're trapped. We're in a crippled state of consciousness. We have that ability underneath it all that we just need to really try hard to find again. And this is what spiritual life is about. It's not about allegiance with a particular religion. It's about developing spiritual vision. And that spiritual vision, again, it means I recognize I'm not my body. I recognize I'm a spark of spiritual consciousness that has this tremendous potential for bliss and happiness and beauty and all that. And I can see the same spark in my next door neighbor. And I can see the same spark in people from all around the world, everybody. I can see the same spark in the animals. I can see the same spark in the plants.
This
I recognize
vision
that.
transcends a religious path. This
Yeah.
is the transcendental paradigm, outlook.
Yeah, the
you know.
transcendental paradigm.
This is it.
So if we find that, we're not going to find that unless we search for that. We're not going to find that if we make our hearts callous to hearing the voice in the heart. We have to pray for it. We have to want it, and we have to keep staring at this world through the goggles of knowledge, through the Jnana Chakshusa, through the eyes of knowledge. Keep staring at it. Keep staring at it. Right? When you lose your job, keep staring at it. When something goes right, staring at it. When something goes wrong, stare at it. Keep looking at the world through the eyes of Bhagavad Gita. Keep looking at the world through the eyes of Srimad Bhagavatam, and that picture can pop up, right? And suddenly you see what suddenly that anybody that's here listening to the show regularly has some kind of interest or attraction to the possibility that there's a truth in all of this. But maybe we don't see it all the time. Either we have faith in it, but we're not living it and seeing it as we move through our day all the time. Or we're doubtful of it. We're hopeful of it maybe, but we're doubtful of it. And so the idea is train your eyes to see it and keep looking and keep staring through those eyes. And that means reflecting on this knowledge as we go through all our ups and downs in life.
Big part of it, sort of reflecting on it.
Yeah.
Journaling about it, inner talking to yourself about it, talking it through. That's how I do it. Just
Do you
talk
journal?
it through. Huh?
Tell me about your journaling, Raghu.
My journaling?
Do you
I
journal
don't journal as much. I talk it out.
with yourself?
I actually talk out loud and go for a walk.
To
Just
yourself?
Talk. Yeah.
That must
Talk
be
these things
interesting.
through. If you see a man wandering the streets talking to himself, they may not just be crazy. They may be crazy.
They may
So
not be. With that,
Kaustubha's going to DJ, and here's a recap I got today. Don't betray the voice. Don't become
Don't
deaf
betray the
to
voice in the
inner
heart.
voice, right?
yeah.
Notice your frequency illusion. What is appearing for you on a regular basis? Do we have our spiritual goggles on, material goggles on? We don't say sinful activities. We say our crippling activities. Be careful of crippling activities, people. Takes you down. Your choices take you down. Be careful of the I, me, and my concept. Nothing's ours, because God is actually in the heart of everyone. And
And Sweet Baby Krishna tonight at 7 p.m.
put on your
Eastern time.
sweet baby Krishna goggles. That's what you should do.
Okay.
And we have a whole beautiful group here on Zoom. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, etc., then you should check out our live Zoom group. And you know what it costs? It costs nothing.
What?
To join the club.
Okay.
We just take over your soul. There's a contract, a Faustian deal we make with you. We just take your soul and we give you the secret codes. You just got to email Mara at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com, and she will give you the codes to get on
Speaking
the
of
show.
Mara's, is there anything else happening today?
Yeah, there's a men's Bhakti recovery group meeting today at 11.
I think
all right.
us men need Bhakti recovery more than anyone, probably, right?
Oh, men are a mess. We know that. Women know that for sure, but men, we know it deeply. Oh yeah, women have their issues. We know all about them, but men, we're a mess.
You know what cracked me up in that episode 1, where there's this woman that had all these premonitions about her pregnancy, how she was going to die on the operating table, this and that, and everybody's telling her, no, you're just getting hysterical, though. People go through this, and then she's sitting there with her husband after everything she said happened. And she's sitting next to her husband, and she's saying, I just needed one it doesn't matter if everybody else, the doctors, and everybody said I was just being hormonal, but I just needed one person to believe me. And he's there like, I do see greater possibilities in the world nowadays since this has occurred. She's looking at him like, why wouldn't you believe me?
All right, crank up that music, Mr. Kaustubha. I want to dance. I gotta get my wiggles out this morning.